Major General Isaac Brock and the Siege of Detroit.
The United States declared war on Britain on June 18, 1812, and despite his preparations, Brock was worried about Canadian security. In Upper Canada, besides the militia, there was only one British regular infantry regiment, a detachment of retired veterans, and a company of artillery, and these had to be dispersed among several widely separated posts. Brock's advantage was that the armed vessels of the Provincial Marine controlled the lakes and allowed him to move his reserves rapidly between threatened points. Brock continually kept the commanders of his post informed of all developments. When news of the outbreak of war reached him, he sent a canoe party under the noted trader and voyager William Mackay to the British outpost at St. Joseph Island on Lake Huron. His orders to Commander Captain Charles Roberts allowed him to stand on the defensive or attack the nearby American outpost at Fort Mackinac at his discretion. Roberts immediately launched an attack at Fort Mackinac with a stretched force of regulars, fur traders, and First Nation warriors. On July 17th, the American garrison was taken by surprise, not being aware that war had been declared, and they surrendered. This victory immediately encouraged many First Nation tribes, who had hitherto been neutral or undecided, to give their active support to the British. They hoped to expel the American settlers from their territories west of the Appalachian Mountains. Brock felt he needed to go farther. He was hampered by Governor General George Prevost, who had replaced Craig in late 1811. Prevost's orders from the government and his own inclinations were to emphasize defenses. Prevost kept the bulk of his forces in Lower Canada to protect Quebec and opposed any attack into the United States. Brock also believed that he was handicapped by inertia and defeatism among the legislature and other officials. Brock wrote to Prevost upset. Then on July 12th, an American army under William Hull had invaded Canada at Sandwich, which later became known as Windsor. The invasion was quickly halted and Hull withdrew, but this gave Brock the excuse he needed to abandon Prevost's orders. Having finally obtained limited support from the legislature for his measures to defend the province, Brock prorogued the assembly and set out on August 6 with a small body of regulars and some volunteers from the York Militia, or the York Volunteers, to reinforce the garrison at Fort Malden, Amherstburg, at the western end of Lake Erie, facing Hall's position at Detroit. Traveling mainly by water in bad weather, Brock reached Amherstburg on August 13th. Here, Brock met Tecumseh and was immediately impressed. Brock also read American dispatches captured from Hall's army. He quickly judged Hall to be timid and afraid of the First Nations, in particular, and the American force to be demoralized and short of rations. Against the advice of his officers, Brock immediately prepared to launch an attack on Detroit. Even with his First Nation allies, Brock was outnumbered. His forces included 600 Native Americans, 1,300 soldiers, as well as 2 battleships, according to his later report. Hall had 2,500 soldiers under his command. Brock decided to use tricks to intimidate Hall. He dressed his militia contingent in uniforms discarded by his regulars, making it appear at a distance as if his forces consisted entirely of British regular infantry. Brock laid siege to Fort Detroit from established artillery positions across the river in Sandwich, which is now known as Windsor. Through a carefully crafted series of marches, he gave the appearance of having much more numerous forces. He had Tecumseh's forces cross in front of the fort several times, doubling back under cover, intimidating Hall with the show of a large, ruckus, barely controlled group of First Nation warriors. Finally, he sent Hall a letter demanding his surrender, in which he stated in part, It is far from my inclination to join in a war of extermination, but you must be aware that the numerous body of Indians who have attached themselves to my troops will be beyond my control the moment the contest commences. Brock hammered the fort with cannon fire. On August 16th, the day after receiving Brock's letter, Hall surrendered. Hall, elderly and without recent military experience, was terrified by the risk of losing the battle. He later wrote that the surrender had saved 2,500 troops and 700 civilians from the horrors of an Indian massacre. The capture of Detroit and Hall's army wounded American morale and eliminated the main American force in the area as a threat, while at the same time boosting morale among his own forces. Brock took the American supplies at Detroit and used them for his own forces, particularly the ill-equipped militia. Under prize regulations, a substantial part of the value of the captured military stores would accrue to him. If he had lived longer, he could have settled his debts. Brock valued the captured ordnance supplies at $30,000. Finally, the victory secured the support of Tecumseh and the other chiefs in his confederation, who took Brock's action as both a sign of competence and a willingness to take action. The capture of Detroit led to British domination over most of Michigan territory. Brock had planned to continue his campaign into the U.S., but he was thwarted by negotiations of an armistice by Prevost with American Major General Henry Dearborn. This stalled Brock's momentum and gave the Americans time to regroup and prepare to invade Canada. Unable to predict the point of invasion, Brock frantically worked to prepare defenses throughout Upper Canada. The Prince Regent decreed a silver medal be struck for presentation to the senior officers to commemorate the event. Remember, if it's more interesting, you can find it here. Thanks for watching.